Agenda item number 9 is titled Updating Stormwater Standards for New Development Statewide. And this is going to be presented by Dave Kramer of Southwest Florida Water Management District and Borja Crane-Amores of FDEP. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a briefing on the latest updates on stormwater rulemaking efforts, as well as how the state rulemaking effort supports local governments working to reduce nutrient pollution and better manage stormwater. The CCMP connection is that this relates to water quality improvement priority action objective number 3, reducing urban stormwater and agricultural runoff pollution, as well as the other presentations to follow address this. And with that, I think we can turn it over to the presenters.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can.
And can you guys see me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And good morning. And thank you guys for the opportunity to talk with you guys today about the Clean Waterways Stormwater Technical Advisory updates. My name is Borja Crane-Amores. I'm with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I am the Program Administrator of the NPDES Stormwater and Technical Service. My co-presenter today is Dave Kramer, Bureau Chief with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Next slide, please. So during the 2020 session, the Florida legislature approved the Clean Waterways Act, which is better known as Senate Bill 712, which was signed by Governor DeSantis on June 30th, 2020. The bill was adopted as Chapter 2020-150 Laws of Florida. This legislation had many directions for improving water quality. The Environmental Resource Permitting Program is focusing on the stormwater rulemaking portion of this legislation. Other programs are focusing on other aspects of the law. So in response, the Stormwater TAC was formed on November 4th, 2020. Next slide, please. The establishment of the TAC, outreach and presentations were requested for public input, and this was conducted on July 30th and again on August 24th of 2020. And the TAC was officially established on November 12th. It was confirmed on November 12th. The first TAC meeting was held December 2020th. We've had a total of 10 meetings as of date, with 2 additional meetings that are planned. The next one is on September 14th. September 14th. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the TAC is public input is an important and valued part of the Florida rule development and activities. The information of a TAC provides the department and the water management districts a way to seek and receive public input recommendations during the rule development process. The TAC is focused on the stormwater rulemaking criteria found in the statewide ERP rules, which are found in Chapter 62-330 of the Florida Administrative Code. Next slide, please. There are currently 13 TAC members. These stakeholders range from academia, local governments, environmental interest groups, agriculture, and urban development, and other organizations. Next slide, please. The TAC's mission shall be to provide a forum for identifying and constructively outlining recommendations for strengthening the stormwater design and operation regulations that are implemented under Part 4, Chapter 373 of the Florida statute, based on the most recent scientific information available and the additional direction provided by Section 5, again, under Chapter 2020-150 Laws of Florida. The goal of the TAC is to develop and provide consensus stormwater rulemaking recommendations through public discussion and constructive deliberation. Next slide. The TAC's charges: options for identifying stormwater design criteria and best management practices to increase nutrient removal from stormwater discharges, measures for consistent application of the performance standards to ensure significant reductions of any pollutant loadings to an impaired water body, and then recommended changes to existing stormwater operation regulations to ensure water resources are protected. Next slide. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Kramer.
Thanks, Borja. And just want to make sure everybody can hear me too. Can you guys
Yes.
hear me? Okay, thank you. So as Borja mentioned, we've been working on this for approximately a year or so, and we are in the process of creating a summary report. So we're working with the TAC to develop the summary report, and we're considering all the tax recommendations that they've provided thus far and all the discussions that we've had as an interagency group and with the technical advisory committee. The draft is actually in the works and under review, and it's anticipated that the summary report will be finalized this October. So I'd now like to talk to you guys briefly about some of the recommendations, the TAC recommendations, and the rulemaking process. And just to mention and to reinforce that these recommendations continue to be discussed. As Borja mentioned, we do have 2 more TAC meetings, and much of this has not been confirmed by the TAC or finalized, but these are definitely discussion topics that have been vetted and discussed over the course of the last year, and are really just representative of some of the bigger topics that are kind of on the table. So first is really more discussion about more robust and really consistent operation and maintenance guidelines that can be applied statewide. The water management districts have differing guidelines as it relates to O&M, and so there's discussion about consistency and requiring an O&M plan as part of every individual permit that we issue. Making sure that all the operation and maintenance entities, especially future owners and homeowners associations, which are one of our larger customers, let's say, as far as operation and maintenance entities goes, that would be making sure that they're bound by these O&M plans and that they're very aware and educated by these O&M plans. And then, of course, considering more frequent inspections. Right now, it can vary across the state. At the Southwest Florida Water Management Districts, our reinspection intervals vary from 2 years to 5 years. There's discussion about regional stormwater systems, which is a pretty big topic and may or may not be tackled with this specific rulemaking, but there's even discussion about considering the idea of mitigation banking for stormwater credits. In certain instances, mitigation banks or regional stormwater quality treatment systems can be very effective at pollutant removal and especially focused maintenance when you have entities that can focus on managing and operating and maintaining these systems in perpetuity, and basically focusing on entities that have the financial means to be doing this could be definitely an alternative or option, especially related to when we have compliance related projects or failures for project specific stormwater management systems. And it's really impractical to either meet the goals on site or just tear up an entire site. So to be able to go to a bank or to a regional treatment system would be a pretty good alternative. One of the larger topics as it relates to regional systems is service area, and so we're currently talking about that. Next slide, please. Reuse water or reclaimed water is a big topic that we've been talking about. Obviously, the nutrient content in some sources of reuse water is of concern from a stormwater standpoint. We've been talking about what it means to apply reuse to the landscape and how event mean concentrations of stormwater runoff can change when you have a project that has an irrigation source that comes from reclaimed water. There's also concerns with commingling any kind of augmentation or reclaimed water or reuse water in a stormwater management system, because it could displace the stormwater treatment volumes that are intended to be served, by the stormwater management system itself, and even maybe decrease or change the anticipated efficiency of the stormwater management system. The concept of presumptive criteria has been followed since the 80s through the ERP program, and we are definitely talking about the idea of a rebuttable presumption versus a monitoring approach where you would issue a permit for a project, and we would rely on results post-construction to see if the project was meeting goals. So we are definitely talking about incorporating not the same, but a similar concept of having guidelines that allow an applicant or a consulting engineer or somebody designing a stormwater management system with an ability to obtain a permit in an efficient way, but also be able to rely on that guidance to meet the goals, the load reduction goals post-construction. Next slide, please. This has been one of the kind of back and forth topics that we've been dealing with since the beginning, and we're still at the point where these definitions have not been finalized, but the concept of what should be defined as pre-development, how we treat redevelopment, and what we consider net improvement are three of the very significant topics that are really guiding a lot of the discussion. Pre-development, of course, is very important because the concentrations of pollutants that a project is credited, let's say, in the existing condition has a significant impact on how much stormwater they would have to treat or retain or detain in the post-development condition. So pre-development is a very significant topic. There is definitely an intent to incentivize redevelopment, but also not to lose the ability to capture any kind of load reductions that we can get from redevelopment projects, especially in very highly intensified and urban, spaces in our state, specifically at, for example, Pinellas County. And then net improvement, the idea that one molecule, or how do we really achieve a significant reduction in nutrient loads, and how do we define net improvement? That's still being discussed, but there is definitely a discussion about how much reduction we want to achieve from a pre to a post condition. Next slide. Part of this will include what's called a Bmp library. The DEP currently has kind of a basic version of the DEP library, but there's discussion about a formalized process for vetting stormwater BMPs. So there would be a requirement for third-party and field testing for anybody that would propose a BMP to be incorporated into the library, potentially fees for this, contracting out whether or not it's done in-house at DEP or through a group of staff members between the water management districts and the DEP, and then how to categorize them. And then really there's continued discussion about how something like this, a library that's continuously added to, that is a living document, how effectively we can incorporate that into the rule. So we're also talking about or reconsidering the use of, for example, dry detention basins and perhaps other BMPs that just have not proven to do well over the years and do not necessarily have, effective pollutant removal function. So that's also on the table. Next slide. So the rule development process will include and has included the water management districts, all of the DEP district service offices, the divisions at the DEP, the DWRM, which is Division of Water Resource Management, and the DEER division, which is the Division of Environmental Assessment and Restoration. It will also include the Chief Science Officer, Dr. Rains, and also several delegated local governments that have the ERP program. Next slide. The rulemaking has thus far been a very highly collaborative effort, and it's going to continue to be between the agencies. We plan on sending out a draft of the rule prior to the first rule development workshop, and we'll give everyone several weeks to review this and provide final comments. So we are in the process of drafting these rules and are definitely in need and seeking public comments. We have not set any dates for the public workshops yet, but we will be conducting at least 2 public workshops. After that, we will move towards finalizing the rule and then, of course, implementing the rule. Just again, I'd like to emphasize, even through this group, that we would like as much participation and comment as possible, and public input and comments are still being accepted through the stormwater rulemaking process and can be submitted both electronically and through hard copy through these two. I'm sorry, if you could go to the next slide, please. There you go. Thank you. Through DEP's website, which is stormwater 2020 at floridadep.gov, and then the mailing address is listed below there if you'd like to send hard copy comments. But either way, it's pretty easy to send comments via email, and any and all comments are still being considered. Next slide, please. So if you go to the DEP's website, and specifically the Clean Waterways Act, is Stormwater Rulemaking Technical Advisory Committee webpage, a lot to say there. All of this information can be found. So the library and the resources associated with the library for the Technical Advisory Committee, copies of prior TAC meeting documents and notes, and public comment can all be found there. The TAC meeting information, the presentations and recordings, and all the videos are available for public view. Borja mentioned it earlier, but we have 2 more TAC meetings. The first one will be on September 14th, which is next week, and the last one will be on October 19th. For other DEP events and public notices, there's a calendar on DEP's website, and then the rules can be found at floridarules.org. And that's all we have, and Borja and I would be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Hi, it's Kathleen Whedon from the City of Venice. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, so just blurt out. I just wanted to let you know that for the City of Venice, when we updated our stormwater utility fee, we are now requiring annual certification that they do not get the water management. We give a water management district discount of up to 60% on their stormwater O&M that they pay for our utility fee on their utility bills. And in order to qualify for that, they have to send us an annual certification signed and sealed by an engineer. So you'll probably start getting some extra ones for SWFMD because they seem to like to fill them out on the SWFMD forms, but requiring that annual documentation that they're maintaining their system. We started several years ago, but we found by making a financial component, we're getting much better cooperation with the facilities, actually making sure those systems are maintained. But just as an FYI.
Excellent. Kathleen, what did you say that was 80%? You're giving an 80%
60%, and it's only of a component portion of it. So the fee is this big long calculation, and they get a pretty significant up to 60% depending on the land use by keeping their system on site maintained. The theory is if they maintain their own system, then what they're discharging into the overall city system is a benefit. For older systems, we're just having an engineer do inspections saying that their system that's currently installed, because some of these systems have been getting these discounts for many, many years, systems that were built in the 80s, and we didn't think it was fair to not have a grandfather component. So we do grandfather the older systems. But we've seen a lot of people out there actually cleaning out their systems and their pipes, and it's been great, just great achievement, I think.
It's a good incentive. Yeah, that's excellent.
All right, I see some questions in the chat from Maya Robert. Let's see. Will you implement some of the BGA task force recommendations? Is the first question.
So
It says
BGA
task force recommendations.
So the Blue-Green Algae Task Force has, was basically the genesis for the, starting the TAC and for these discussions. We actually have Dr. Raines kicking off the next meeting on the 14th, and we will be discussing specifically many of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recommendations. But yes, definitely. And Jennifer, I can see the next question is, if BMP reductions are reevaluated, how will you go about systems already in place? Will you mandate additional components to increase treatment? That hadn't been decided yet, but there has not been a whole lot of discussion about projects that are already legally in existence and in the ground. So projects that have already received an environmental resource permit and are performing in accordance with the permitting requirements. I personally don't see an ability or part of this rulemaking incorporating a requirement to go back and retrofit or change some of those projects or require some kind of additional efficiencies, if that answers your question.
Okay, while we're waiting for additional questions and comments to come in, I will go ahead and try to stimulate some discussion by adding a couple things in here. I was personally involved in the previous TAC 10 years ago for 3 years who created that 2010 Stormwater Handbook, which for you all on the management committee, that was an attachment to today's agenda. And I wondered first how much of that was utilized. I know you certainly have it on your webpage and have supplied it to the TAC members, but what concepts might be being carried forward from the previous technical advisory committee's recommendations. And also with regards to net improvement, if there has been any discussion about trying to reach the Florida Administrative Code 80% removal for both total nitrogen and total phosphorus as the definition of what level of improvement is the objective with regards to this new regulation.
Thank you, Jennifer. And yes, to answer your question, the first question was how much of the 2010 draft applicants statewide stormwater rulebook handbook is being incorporated. I would say a lot, a very good percentage. If anything, it was kind of the basis and the foundation for where a lot of our discussion started. The TAC has considered most of the information, data, and science that was incorporated into the handbook, and we have definitely been incorporating everything that can practically be incorporated, although it's not in the same. It doesn't look like it's in the same format, but all of the information, of course, the best scientific information available that was associated with that effort, and everything since then has been discussed and considered. So we're making the best effort to incorporate as much as we possibly can. To answer your second question about the 80% removal of nitrogen and phosphorus, yes, we are definitely working on establishing standards. One of my slides mentioned the concept of net improvement. So there's what we're currently deliberating and working on is finalizing exactly that. How much reduction will be necessary for a given project. It will definitely depend on where a project is located. We are currently discussing how comprehensive or how inclusive the boundaries of watersheds or WIBIDs or HUC codes should be as they apply to projects, and what the governing treatment goal will be. So we'll, in most cases, what we will be considering is either net improvement or 80% or greater reduction in the given pollutant. So Jennifer, it would depend on whether or not the receiving system is impaired or the receiving system below that is impaired. And so those things are really the crux, and we're working on finalizing that stuff right now. So I'd recommend making any of your kind of formal recommendations at this time. But that is definitely something we are working on currently.
And we have another question in chat from Roland Ottolini asking, considering requiring monitoring to verify performance as part of the O&M, are you considering that?
It had been considered, and it was an early discussion topic. I can't say whether or not it will be included or not because this hasn't been finalized. We'll see what the TAC does recommend, but it does seem like we will be moving towards what could be called a presumptive criteria
Okay, while we're waiting for additional questions, kind of a follow-up on that, in the current presumptive criteria that uses the pre versus post analysis to determine if there is, net improvement, pre-development can be currently end use, not necessarily natural loading rates. And so if you have a very polluting land use, you could essentially be grandfathering that level of loading with just, a very small negligible reduction to get that net improvement. So, maybe you could speak to that if that's going to change fundamentally. And then the other thing is, in that analysis right now, wetlands, are looked at as a positive load source, when in fact, as we know, that although wetlands receive nutrient pollution from offsite sources, of course, they generally uptake more than they produce. So anyway, we got a little background noise, so if anyone can mute, is not muted. But anyway, I think that is one thing we were curious has there been any discussion about removing, I know in the last technical advisory committee, removing wetlands as a positive load source, so that essentially we're incentivizing wetland protection.
So Jennifer, you and I talked a little bit about this at the Environmental Advisory Committee when it was here at the Water Management District. There has not been specific discussion about that, although we have had discussion about the use of wetlands, natural wetlands in the landscape for stormwater treatment. So in cases where an applicant chooses, if they wholly own an isolated wetland system for use as using wetlands for stormwater treatment, and that discussion topic was definitely considered and talked about, and it does not sound like wetlands themselves will be a BMP. Now that hasn't been finalized either, but I know what the real question was in the analysis when you're generating pre and post development pollutant loadings. I don't think practice has ever called for changing the assignment of wetlands and how much import or export they have when they're incorporated into the design or into the project area of say a development. In general, I think practice has been just to consider them as neutral and as just given the season as a wash over the course of a normal rainy season. So I don't necessarily see there hasn't been specific discussion about changing that practice or moving towards giving more credit for existing wetlands within project areas or less credit. That definitely has not been a specific discussion topic.
All right, not to belabor it, but just to clarify, I think the concern really was that in the analysis portion, when you're looking at pre-development and you have wetlands as a positive loading source, in some cases higher than commercial development, that if you were to replace those wetlands with commercial development, on paper, it would look like you're reducing nutrients. And so that's why there's been discussion that in the analysis of pre versus post, that in the pre-development to not consider wetlands as a positive load source per se. So
okay, I see what you're saying.
I won't belabor it, but I think hopefully you understand it wasn't to use the wetlands, but to make sure that it's not, essentially disincentivizing those wetlands to be protected and replacing them with development. But anyhow, are there any other questions from any of the committee members? I I'm looking for hands or anything in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Dana Detmar with the City of Sanibel. I do have a question.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if the TAC, as far as the mitigation banks go, if they're going to be considering putting any type of like geographic restrictions on where the mitigation banks can occur relative to, you know, the person or the community that needs that mitigation bank. Like, for instance, you know, this is an exaggeration, but someone in Southwest Florida, would they be able to pay, you know, mitigation bank credits to somewhere in Northern Florida? Does that
I
make
would say no, definitely not.
Okay.
So, but to speak to that, to the question, the concept of a mitigation bank, not just regional stormwater quality treatment systems, is kind of in its infancy. So that I don't anticipate that water quality mitigation banking will be part of this rule, although there may be a placeholder or some kind of at least like a place to allow the agencies to consider mitigation banking as it becomes more practical and realistic in the coming years. But we will definitely, I do not see us incorporating the idea of mitigation banking formally in this rulemaking process. But to specifically answer the question, the idea of giving credit where if there was regional stormwater quality treatment credit generated, to be able to apply that credit in a location where it cannot be realized is not part of the discussion. Regional water quality treatment systems should be located in places within a practical distance, a reasonable distance, within the same WIBID watershed as the impact project, or where you're realizing the reductions in or increases in nutrient loading. And so there would have to be definitely a nexus between the benefit and the impact.
You.
You're welcome.
Jennifer, this is Elizabeth. Can
Go
I
ahead,
ask a
Elizabeth.
question? I got
Yes, please.
I got 2 points I want to raise. Have y'all considered requiring aeration of stormwater ponds? We are doing that in Northport. Aeration being either bubbler or fountains, sufficient for the size of the ponds, because I think we all know that really helps with water quality. The other thing that I'd like to ask is, have there been any discussions about requiring the replanting of littoral zones? I know Swiftmud has decided not to require that, but we in City of Northport thinks that's probably one of the best widgets in our toolbox to remove nutrients. In fact, I think it's a really good, probably the only way to remove nitrogen after it gets in wet ponds. And we allow people to plant the littoral zone around the edges of the pond, especially where the nutrients come into the pond, so that they're allowed more contact time rather than at the very end outfall. Because when the nutrients go to the outfall is during the rain, and it goes through too fast for the plants to uptake the nutrients. So has there been any talk about that? These 2 points, aeration and plantings.
Hi, Elizabeth. No, not specifically, although those are things that could be potentially incorporated into what I described earlier as a Bmp library. So the DEP and the water management districts are doing the best to incorporate all low impact development practices, structural BMPs, other types of water quality BMPs that aren't necessarily recognized formally by rule, but that can be vetted and approved through a given process and incorporated into a library, and therefore potentially applied for future projects to obtain some certain load reduction credit or something like that. So the idea of aeration, or the idea of an actual vegetative littoral zone or harvesting of a littoral zone, could potentially be part of that BMP library. And that could be, and that could be considered then by either of the agencies when deciding whether or not to issue a permit.
Thank you. I'm glad you're all talking about that.
And I see another comment from Roland here about net improvement for redevelopment may not meet basin management action plan goals or numeric nutrient criteria, leaving the balance of load reduction on local governments to clean up. So can you speak for a moment more about what specifically you're doing or thinking of doing for redevelopment projects?
I'd like to see if Borja wants to contribute to that answer first, if he's still there.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I'll refer this one to you.
Okay. That has been a kind of the focus of that discussion has come from, is that Greg at DEP, Borja? Greg D'Angelo?
Yeah, Greg D'Angelo, he's with your division.
Okay, so distributing that responsibility. You know, the environmental resource permitting program can only really ask so much of the applicants. So on a project by project basis, BMAPs and the requirements of the BMAPs can definitely be considered, although the literal impairment of the receiving system will likely govern the limitations or the design of the stormwater management system. The BMAP does play a role, but that program, and these are conversations that we are having with the DEER program and others at the DEP, but how to balance that and how to continue successfully implementing both programs and having the ERP program contribute as much as possible to the goals of the NPDES and BMAP programs, but how much there are limitations about how a certain specific project can help to reach certain goals. So if there's a goal for a certain BMAP for a 60 or 80% reduction, it'd be very challenging to have a handful of development projects within the basin meet that goal. You know, the goal will have to be achieved through a continued combination of local government efforts and through other regulatory programs that help with reductions in nutrients. But the ERP program does not have the ability to single-handedly reduce, or meet the goals of BMAP, of specific BMAPs.
All right, well, that definitely is also a concern expressed by other members in this management committee who are really the boots on the ground in different municipalities and cities and counties. And so understand that, the importance of getting this right relieves some of the burdens that they're being faced with and some of the financial costs that they're having to incur from development that isn't properly managing stormwater. So I really encourage everyone in the management committee to take this opportunity. This is the moment to provide your comments and recommendations to the TAC and to the department before final decisions are made. So we wanted to make sure that you all were aware that this is that window of opportunity and that you take advantage of it to hopefully, steer this in a direction that will make it better for each of you with regards to your responsibilities. Does anybody have any final comments or questions? If not, we'll need to wrap up and move on here shortly.
I got one last question, if I may. What kind of punitive actions is being envisioned in the future for homeowners that will not comply with any of these limitations, any one of these criteria that you are going to be establishing? I want to know what the homeowners have to face in case that they're failing, their systems are failing.
So there hasn't been a whole lot of talk, and it is at the discretion of the DEP and specific water management districts on how to pursue compliance and then enforcement of the permits that they individually issue. And there has not been a whole lot of talk about changing that practice, and those practices may vary from district to district. So I'm not trying to answer your question, but the idea of monitoring certain cases, having more frequent inspections, and then having a more robust approach to compliance of each permit that we issue is definitely one of our goals and concerns. The water management districts in general are not regulating the single family residential development, although DEP is. But in this case, we're talking about stormwater BMPs and stormwater management systems specifically for development projects. And so we're typically talking about dealing with LLCs and corporations, community development, homeowners associations and the like. So, organizations that we would be working with in lieu of dealing with a specific single family homeowner. And that is current practice. But if there were more frequent inspections and if the group does decide that an additional compliance is necessary, then that will be part of it.
All right, thank you, Dave.